Long before a single star offered direction to the desperate, the world was a kingdom of shadows. Great empires did not just rule, they rose like crowned monsters, their golden crowns masking eyes of cold fire and hearts of stone. For 400 years, the heavens had been a vault of iron, closed, silent, and deaf to the cries of the broken. The air itself feels heavy, as if the dust of 1,000 fallen kingdoms has settled over the souls of men. In the narrow, torch-lit corridors of ancient cities, humanity does not live, it merely survives. Every shadow is a reminder of the stone giants, the empires of Rome and Babylon that march with a trail of forced obedience, crushing hope into the very dirt they conquer. Amidst this brutal landscape of scarred faces and heavy yokes, a man, weary and bent, stops under the weight of a massive wooden beam. His yellowed eyes, hollowed by centuries of waiting, look toward a horizon that has promised nothing but darkness. Beside him, a young girl, her voice a fragile thread in the wind, whispers a question that has haunted the silence of ages. Has the light forgotten our names? The man has no answer, yet his heart begins to vibrate with a silent premonition. He does not see it yet, but the darkness is reaching its peak. The void that no crown, sword, or empire could fill is about to be shattered by a light so humble it will make the monster kings tremble on their thrones of pride. The air in Judea was not made of oxygen, but of iron and dust. Under the shadow of the stone giants, the massive Roman arches and silent looming fortresses, the world felt compressed, as if the very sky had lowered its ceiling. Every morning the clatter of caligae on cobblestones acted as a heartbeat of forced obedience, a rhythmic reminder that the land no longer belonged to its people. Men walked with shoulders hunched, carrying the invisible weight of 1,000 unfulfilled years, while the gold-crowned monsters of the empire watched with eyes of cold indifference. Life was a cycle of toil and tribute, a slow erosion of the soul, where even the wind seemed to whisper that the heavens had finally turned to stone. Beyond the Roman walls, the earth itself seemed to groan under the memory of older, vaster shadows. In the silence of the desert nights, the ghosts of Babylon still lingered, whispering of golden statues and kings who once commanded the sun to stand still. These were the monarchs who built towers to pierce the heavens, believing their names were etched in the stars, only to have their grandeur reduced to shards of clay and wind-blown silt. Their thrones, once thought eternal, were now merely resting places for vultures and dust. These echoes served as a grim reminder to the weary. If even the gods of gold could fall into ruin, what hope remained for a world that had forgotten the sound of a true divine voice? Within this graveyard of fallen gods and rising monsters, a more silent decay took root, the corrosion of the human spirit. Faith, once a roaring flame, had flickered down to a glowing ember, choked by the ash of 400 silent years. In the marketplaces, men traded honesty for survival, and in the temples, prayers felt like hollow echoes bounced back by a cold ceiling of brass. It was the darkest hour, not for lack of sun, but for the absence of a sign. Mothers looked at their children and saw only future subjects for a king who didn't care. And fathers stopped teaching the ancient songs, fearing that hope was a luxury they could no longer carry. Yet, in the depths of this exhaustion, a few refused to let the embers die. In hidden chambers and candle-lit corners, gray-bearded elders and silent scholars leaned over parchment that had grown brittle with the weight of centuries. Their fingers traced the faded ink of ancient promises, searching for a single word that might break the heaven's seal. These were the keepers of the flickering torch, men who looked past the monster kings to find the pulse of a nearly forgotten hope. They debated in whispers, parsing the silence for a premonition, convinced that the world's darkest night was not an end, but a labor pang. They did not see the star yet, but their hearts were already beginning to vibrate.
Then the silence did not simply end, it was torn open. In the blistering wastes of the Judean desert, a man emerged from the dust, his voice a jagged blade of truth cutting through the stagnant air. He did not wear the gold of the monster kings, but the rough hair of camels and a spirit set ablaze by the very heavens that had seemed closed. His cry was a thunderclap in a world that had forgotten the sound of rain, calling not for the sharpening of swords, but for the softening of hearts. He was the flame that announced the dawn, the singular voice proving the sky was finally hearing the earth speak again, preparing a path through the wilderness of the human soul. The voice from the dust did more than disturb the air. It set the world into a slow tectonic vibration. Rumors began to travel faster than the Roman post, carried by merchants on the Silk Road and whispered by laborers in the shadows of the stone giants. It was a gentle but persistent restlessness, a feeling that the very fabric of time was thinning. People who had long ago surrendered to the dark now found themselves looking toward the horizon for no reason they could name. Even the air in the city felt different, laden with a heavy electric announcement. The great weight was shifting into a great expectation, as if the earth itself were exhaling a breath it had held for 400 years. Even the iron-willed masters of the world were not immune to this invisible tide. In the halls of power, where Caesar's word was law, a decree of shadows was signed, a census intended to count every head and claim every copper for the glory of the empire. To the Roman mind, it was a display of absolute control, a way to map the reach of their stone giants. Yet they did not realize their ink was being guided by a hand they refused to acknowledge. Every soldier's march and every traveler's journey was being channeled toward a single, humble point in history. The pride of the throne was becoming the very instrument of the promise, proving that even the darkest decrees can light the path to the dawn. That night, the air over Bethlehem did not just grow cold, it began to vibrate with a secret that the earth could no longer contain. The narrow streets of the little town were choked with the weary and the displaced, all gathered by a Roman decree they thought was for Caesar's tax, unaware they were being positioned for God's promise. High above, the sky tilted, as if the stars were leaning in to witness the end of the great silence. There was a supernatural tension in the atmosphere, a heaviness in the light that made the shepherds on the hills feel more alive than they had in a lifetime. The world held its breath, caught in the final, shivering moment before the dawn. Then, in the quietest corner of a world obsessed with giants, the great silence finally broke. Within the humble shadows of a stable, far from the golden crowns and iron decrees, eternity touched time. A gentle light began to pulse from the hay, growing like a dawn that had been held back for centuries. As Maria leaned in, the ancient void was filled by a fragile, pure, and eternal cry, the first breath of the one who would make the monster kings tremble. The sky did not just open, it bent to kiss the earth. The star had arrived, and with that single shivering breath, the world without hope was gone forever, swallowed by a light that would never set.